If you have bought eggs in Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, New Mexico, or Mississippi since mid-July, you need to check your carton. Nearly 1.6 million dozen eggs, that's over 19 million individual eggs, have been recalled after they were linked to a Salmonella outbreak that's already hospitalized dozens of people across the country. This isn't a just in case recall. The FDA upgraded it to a Class 1, its highest risk category, reserved for situations where a product could cause serious injury or death. Here's everything you need to know: how to check your eggs, how long this is expected to run, how people actually get sick from this, whether cooking protects you, and why some food safety experts say this kind of outbreak is becoming more common and harder to catch. How to check your carton. Look at the short end of the carton. The code is printed there in date coding link. You're looking for two things together. First, a plant code of either P1950 or 0840962. Second, a Julian date between 157 and 184. That's the day of year the eggs were packed. 157 means June 6th, and 184 means July 3rd. If both match, the eggs are recalled, regardless of the brand name on the front. The brands affected are Kroger, Simple Truth, Brookshire's, Country Morning, and Calmaine Sunups. Carton sizes affected: eggs containing 6 eggs, 12 eggs, 18 eggs, 24 eggs, 30 eggs, 36 eggs, and 60 egg counts, plus bulk food service packaging. The sell by or best by dates should be July 20th, 2026 through August 17th, 2026. They were sold in retail at Kroger stores in Texas and Louisiana, Brookshire grocery stores in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, New Mexico, and Mississippi, plus smaller retail outlets. And for food services, restaurants and institutions in Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. If your carton matches, don't eat them. Throw them out or return them to the store for a refund. Retailers are honoring this, even without a receipt in most cases. How long is this going to drag on? Honestly, nobody's given us an end date. And that's the kind of the point I want to make clear. The recall went out on July 22nd. Then, about 3 weeks later, in mid-August, the FDA upgraded it to the top severity level, once they confirmed it was tied to real illnesses. And here's the part that should worry you a little. The FDA has said flat out that this one farm doesn't explain every case in the outbreak. They are still hunting for other sources. Now, the good news, sort of, is that the eggs in question have a best by dates that run out around August 17th. So, a lot of this product should already be gone from shelves and fridges. But you know how it goes. People don't always check dates. Eggs sit in the back of the fridge for weeks past when they should. And here's a genuinely unsettling detail. The earliest illness in this outbreak go back to November of last year, 8 months before anyone even issued a recall. So this strain was quietly making people sick for the better part of a year before anyone connected the dots. Bottom line, treat this as still open. still active, not resolved. How many people are actually sick and where? As of the latest numbers, we're at 98 confirmed cases across 17 states. 26 of those people ended up hospitalized, and thankfully, 0 deaths so far. The people affected range from babies under a year old and all the way up to someone 81 years old. And unsurprisingly, Texas is where most of this is concentrated. 73 of the 98 cases are there, which tracks, since that's where the farms actually are. Louisiana got 5, a handful of other states have 1 or 2 each, scattered as far out as New York and West Virginia. But, and this is worth saying clearly, the CDC itself says this number is almost certainly an undercount. Most people who got salmonella just tough it out at home for a few days and never go to a doctor, never get tested. So every one of these 98 confirmed cases, there are probably a bunch more that just never got counted. So, how does someone actually get sick from an egg? The strain here is Salmonella enteritidis, and it's a little sneakier than most foodborne salmonella because it doesn't just sit on the outside of the shell. It can actually get inside the egg itself before the shell even forms if the hen that laid it was infected. That's the scary part because washing the shell doesn't protect you from that. The other way people get exposed is more familiar. Bacteria on the outside of the shell gets onto your hands or your counter while you're cracking the egg, and then it spreads to whatever else you're cooking or touching. In this specific outbreak, they interviewed 44 sick people, and 40 of them, that's about 91% of them, said they'd eaten shell eggs before getting sick. That's about as strong a signal as you can get pointing straight at the eggs. And typically, symptoms show up somewhere between 12 and 72 hours after eating the contaminated food. So it's not instant. You might not connect it back to that omelet from 2 days ago. So I get asked this question a lot. Does cooking the eggs actually protect you? Yes, and this is honestly the most useful thing I can tell you in this whole video. Salmonella dies when you cook it. If your eggs are cooked all the way through, from yolk, from white, or heated to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, you're safe, even if that particular egg happened to be carrying bacteria. Where the real danger lives is in raw or undercooked eggs. Think runny yolks, over easy, soft poached, and in homemade stuff that uses raw egg and never gets cooked afterward. Homemade mayonnaise, hollandaise sauce, raw cookie dough, homemade Caesar dressing, eggnog, all of that. So, here's the practical takeaway. If you've got eggs in your fridge and you're not sure whether they're part of the recall, just cook them thoroughly. That alone neutralizes the risk completely. What symptoms should you actually watch for? If you do get exposed, you're looking at fever, diarrhea that can be bloody, nausea, vomiting, and cramps. Most healthy adults get through this in 4 to 7 days with just rest and fluids. The people who need to be more careful are young kids, adults over 65, pregnant women, and anyone with a weakened immune system. In rare cases, the infection spreads past the gut into the bloodstream and causes more serious stuff, like heart valve infections or arthritis. Uncommon, but it's why the FDA doesn't mess around with egg-related salmonella, even though most cases are mild. One more detail. This strain is resistant to one common antibiotic and less responsive to another. So, if someone does need antibiotics for a severe case, doctors may reach for a different drug. Most people won't need antibiotics at all. Okay, so what actually happened here? A company called Midwest Poultry Services voluntarily recalled about 1.5 million dozen eggs, white shell and brown cage free, produced on 2 Texas farms. Roughly 19 million individual eggs, shipped between early June and early July, with best by dates from July 20th through August 17th. So, how did they even catch this? Here's something interesting. This wasn't triggered by a wave of complaints. Midwest Poultry caught this themselves through routine environmental testing, swabbing barns and equipment. Standard practice, not because anything seemed wrong. Those swabs came back positive for salmonella. Genetic sequencing through an outside lab matched it to the strain already circulating in the outbreak. So they reported it to the FDA on July 21st, and the recall went out the next day. Honestly, that's the system working the way it's supposed to. A company self-reporting fast. The problem is the outbreak had already been running for 8 months before anyone traced it back. Now, here's the nuance a lot of the coverage misses. The recall and the outbreak are connected, but not the same investigation. The recall is contamination found at the farm. The outbreak is the CDC connecting sick people through interviews and lab matching. Put those together, and investigators concluded these eggs are a likely source of at least some illnesses. But the FDA said this producer doesn't account for every case. There could be a second source nobody's identified yet. That lines up with the November start date, months before this recall existed. The outbreak was already underway before this batch of eggs entered the picture. And on the severity escalation, this didn't start out labeled maximum danger. It began as a standard recall on July 22nd, then got reclassified to Class 1 about 3 weeks later in mid August. Not because of new contamination, but because by then they had enough lab data and case evidence to confidently tie real illnesses back to these specific eggs. Now, a little bigger picture, and I want to be careful how I say this. This isn't about pointing fingers at anyone, but it's worth knowing the agencies responsible for catching this before it reaches your kitchen have had a rough couple of years, resource-wise. The FDA and CDC combined have lost more than 7,000 employees since last year. FDA has around 440 food safety inspectors covering roughly 36,000 facilities. By their own numbers, they need closer to 1,500. There are state food safety programs run largely on federal grants, but those have been cut by around 40% too, leaving some state teams down 30 to 50% in staffing. You can see the effect in the numbers. In 2024, the FDA identified the actual source in about 70% of outbreaks investigated. In 2025 to 2026, that dropped to around 36%. To be fair, there is no evidence the specific recall was delayed by any of that. The company caught it themselves and reported quickly. But this happened inside a food safety system that's measurably thinner than it used to be, with fewer inspectors and slower traceback ability. That's the kind of environment where a problem can sit quietly for 8 months, like this one did, before anybody connects the dots. So, here's what I want you to actually do. Go check your eggs. Look for plant code P-1950 or 08 40962, paired with the Julian date between 157 and 184, printed on the carton. Not sure? That's fine. Cook your eggs thoroughly. That alone takes care of it. And if anyone in your house has had fever, diarrhea, or vomiting after eating eggs recently, especially in those affected states, mention it to a doctor, particularly for kids, older folks, or anyone immunocompromised. This is still an open investigation, so keep an eye on the FDA and the CDC official websites. That case count could still climb.